If you know me or have seen my other videos, you probably know that I am a huge fan of JRPGs. From playing them, to talking about them, to making videos on them, I just generally love being a part of the community. And while my videos up until this point have been mostly positive, today we're going to switch gears and focus on what I personally found to be my most disappointing JRPGs of the decade so far. Disappointing doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like them or that they're my least favorite games, but more so that these games are games that I was really excited for, but personally felt let down by for one reason or another. And before we get started, of course everything I talk about here will be just my opinion, and I don't necessarily think that all of these games are bad or irredeemable, or that someone would have to be crazy to enjoy them. Starting off with one I do generally dislike, however, is, well, let me just lay some groundwork here by saying that I absolutely adore One Piece. I've been caught up on the manga for quite a few years now, and reading the new chapters is usually one of the highlights of my week. To say that it is one of my favorite series would be an understatement. So when Piece Odyssey, a fully fledged turn-based One Piece game, was announced in 2022, I was through the roof with excitement. Taking my favorite series and combining it with my favorite kind of video game, it looked and sounded like a dream come true. Unfortunately, however, this video is not titled The Epic and Most Amazing JRPGs of the Decade. It really did not take me that long after I started playing to realize that this game was not my kind of game. I kind of had to fight through some layers of denial because I wanted this game to be good so bad. But, as someone who really likes to dive deep and analyze the games that he plays, I couldn't really run from the truth for that long. Piece Odyssey is a terrible JRPG. It's just so shallow. Incredibly so in the overall character progression. Let me ask you a question. When you wake up in the morning, are you able to get dressed? Are you able to put on a shirt, pants, socks, and shoes? If your answer to that question is yes, then you have the knowledge and intellect to completely min-max your characters on your initial blind playthrough. Characters just unlock moves as the game progresses, and the only way to influence any of their stats is by equipping charms to raise their specific stats. And there really is never a reason not just to equip the strongest ones, because you really aren't limited in doing so. The battles themselves are not much more in-depth either. Okay, I actually will say that on paper, I think the battle system here is really cool. The whole system of each encounter randomly splitting up your party and the enemies into 4 different areas, with the goal being to strategically swap your party members in and out, and have them traverse between the areas as efficiently as possible while defeating the enemies, is really cool. And I think that if another game were to take this and completely rebalance it, as well as place some limitations on it with higher difficulty, it would make for an incredible game. The problem, though, is that Piece Odyssey does absolutely nothing with it. There is just absolutely zero friction to it whatsoever. It is very simple to just completely reposition your characters in the optimal layouts with just a few presses of the button on your controller. Switching out is a free action, and enemies don't really do anything to stop you from moving about, and you pair this with the rock, paper, scissors mechanic that makes even Pokemon look complicated, and you've got yourself an incredibly boring time. Each party member and enemy in the game is given the role of either a power type, a technique type, or a speed type, with power moves being strong against speed type characters, speed moves being strong against technique type characters, and technique moves being strong against power type characters. And when I say they're strong against, I really mean it. If you're using the correct moves against the correct enemies, you're basically one-shotting them. Unfortunately, however, the same is not true of the reverse. Your characters have so much defense and HP stats compared to what the enemies are able to put out, that even if you do get hit by what should be a devastating attack, it really won't leave much of a dent. And like how I said it's really free to just move your characters around, there's nothing stopping you from easily being able to move your characters to a quadrant filled with enemies that they're basically invincible against and will one-shot. It kind of reminds me of, you know that toy where you have to put the different shaped blocks into their respective holes? Yeah, that one. If you're able to play with that toy at an at least 50% success rate, you have mastered the combat system of Piece Odyssey. Earlier, I said I think this game is a terrible JRPG, but if I do have to say something positive about it, I still kind of think it's a good One Piece game. For starters, I think that it looks so good, and the 3D style of the game is almost perfectly, in my opinion, translated over from the 2D manga. Each move that your character uses looks incredible and are just cut straight out of the series, and it is pretty nice to be able to see it and just be part of the overall experience. I also think that the story is really good, and the game was just so clearly made by die-hard One Piece fans, with just so much there for longtime fans to enjoy, with so many deep cuts from the manga, that if you are a One Piece fan, you're able to get enough out of it to maybe still have a decent bit of time with the game. But as a JRPG, you literally should not waste your time here. Fire Emblem was one of the first series that I ever really got into, and while I was definitely more into them when I was a lot younger, playing through any that I could get my hands on at the time, I've at least kept up with the new ones ever since. Unfortunately, I had a pretty miserable experience playing through Fire Emblem Engage, the most recent release in the series. And I don't know if it's just that I've outgrown the series, or if this game is just one of the worst one of the series, but after giving it a lot of thought, I kind of think that it's the latter. During the pre-release marketing and the trailer phase for this game, the big thing that I was worried about was that I thought the engage mechanic looked pretty stupid. It really seemed to me like it was going to create a situation where your ring-equipped characters were going to be the main focus, and it was going to emphasize creating a strong few units rather than a balanced army, which is one of the worst things that I think a strategy RPG can do. And while, yes, I think this absolutely ended up being true of the final game, and pretty accurate to my experience, that ended up being one of the absolute least of my problems playing through the game. There's really no other way to say this, and I kind of think this is the definitive problem with the game, and it's that I think Fire Emblem Engage is both so ashamed of itself and just the series as a whole. And I know that statement might not make the whole lot of sense due to the vast number of references and homages to the previous games, but hear me out. Think of any other strategy RPG. For the most part, you're just doing the maps and battles, alongside party member progression and optimization pretty much back to back. The games are usually just focused on more being a strategical experience and not wasting your time with anything unnecessary. You do a map, maybe tinker with your characters a bit, and then you're right on to the next one. Fire Emblem Engage, on the other hand, feels like it does the opposite of what a good strategy game should do. Like I said, it almost feels like the game is ashamed of being a strategy game, making you spend as much time outside the actual battles as possible. I don't know if they're trying to trick the players into thinking that there's more to do, or if they don't want players getting bored of the battles, or what the heck else. But here's how your average Fire Emblem Engage chapter plays out. You start in the Salmonal, and are pretty much forced to go around and do all of your chores. You gotta go talk to every party member for stat bonuses and upgrades. Then you have to go to the kitchen to order food to make your characters develop bonds and date each other for stat upgrades. Then you have to go to the farm and harvest all of the materials so that you're able to craft gear. And after that, you have to sit through all of the support conversations. Then you gotta go fishing, which every game feels the need to have nowadays. And then finish off by playing an exercise minigame for the optimal stats in the upcoming battle. Then sure, after all of that, you can maybe tinker with your characters and re-equip them. Then it's time for the actual battle. Which sure, I guess is solid enough, aside from one major issue, but more on that later. And then after the battle, you have to explore the map you just fought on, once again talking to every unit and searching for different animals to add to your farm for harvests. Then you gotta start back up again with your somnol chores. It's exhausting. Even just writing the script, I'm getting burnt out of the game, and I haven't even touched it since the day that I beat it and put it down for good. It made me so miserable, and really just made me not enjoy the game. And it's not like the game even gives you a choice in all this. You can't not do these things, as this is one of the only ways to strengthen units and craft the gear needed for the later maps. You are put at such a disadvantage if you don't do the long and tedious song and dance at every single chapter. And the major flaw that I mentioned within the battles themselves, that's enough of the turn-wheel Fire Emblem. That is enough. Nothing completely removes the tacticality and stressful decision-making of this tactical game, more than a mechanic that lets you completely do any mistake 10 different times a map. A strategy game should be about strategy and making tough decisions and optimizing battles in high-risk situations, but this game is once again just completely ashamed of itself. It doesn't want there to be any sort of friction for the player in the slightest, because it has no faith in its player base or longtime fans. When you think of Fire Emblem, you might think of the permadeath because for a long time, that was the main gimmick of the series. But I think that Engage is just so afraid that players might lose members of the dating simulator, so you are given chance after chance after chance to undo any mistake that you make, to the point where if you are even slightly decent at the game, you are not going to lose anybody ever. Some of the map design is actually pretty good, but you genuinely would never know it because you are never even remotely required to interact with any of the game systems on more than the most superficial of levels, because once again, this game is ashamed of itself and the series at large. And I mentioned earlier, I think the ring engage system is pretty shallow and poorly balanced, and yes, it is definitely true. But if that were the worst problem of the game, it would be about 10 times better. I dislike this game not just as itself, but because it represents the death or the murder of one of my favorite childhood series. If you know me, or have seen my other videos, you might know that I'm pretty into the Trails series, having played through everything through the first Kuro no Kiseki game, which I guess now is called Trails Through Daybreak. And if you have seen my Trails video, you might remember that I was not particularly into this one. Even though the game right before Daybreak, Trails into Reverie, ended up being my favorite game of the entire series, I was very excited for Daybreak. A refresh with a new setting, battle and orbit system, alongside plenty of other upgrades and changes, seemed very much to me like something that I was more than ready to sink my teeth into. However, I really ended up not enjoying it pretty much at all, which was so unfortunate to me because frankly, on paper, that there was so much here that I thought was cool. I loved the new battle system. How cool it was that there was now the added mechanic of free movement and positioning to maximize art and craft efficiency, as well as the chain attack system, which seemed like it would do wonders to reward skilled gameplay. Also, I was very excited to see sort of a return to form to the older orbit system from the beginning of the series, in which putting together different combinations in the lines would unlock different passive skills. But what ended up making this game very disappointing to me was that I felt like that there was so much potential, but it just felt so completely squandered by some of the poorest, most bare-bones balancing of the entire series. The game just felt so exploitable. And what I mean by that is that I played on Nightmare difficulty, but I had such an easy and bland time with most, if not all, of the encounters, because it felt like absolutely none of the enemy encounters or bosses were even remotely designed with any sort of contingency plan in mind. It really felt like everything was designed to be able to be beaten by the default character stats with basic arts and crafts, and then they added all of these different mechanics and optimization strategies afterwards without ever updating any of the encounters. I'm very much someone who gets a lot of fun out of RPGs by really trying my best to create a team that is optimized and efficient as possible, and it felt like none of the battles in this entire game were even remotely ready for a team that had even a little bit of thought put into them. Once again on Nightmare difficulty. And I'm definitely not saying that every game needs to be super hardcore with grueling battles that can only be beaten with hours and hours of preparation, but I feel like on Nightmare difficulty of a game, I should be met with at least a little bit of pushback. It just became so unsatisfying to me because I felt like it was making the game boring for myself by trying to play smartly. And so many of the skills just ended up feeling really pointlessly designed. Like, oh boy, I take slightly less damage from water attacks. That's not something I ever really felt like I was ever going to notice. It just started to feel so pointless to play because I really wasn't having any fun. And don't get me even started on the worst part of the game. I believe that the 4 SPG quests are some of the worst side quests in not just the series, but in the entire genre. I'm not at all opposed to a story or a dialogue-heavy game, but these just absolutely killed the pacing for me. It felt like several times a chapter, literally everything came to a screeching halt and I had to spend a few hours just walking around and talking to NPCs. And once again, I know that this is one of the reasons that people love the series, so I'm not knocking the concept of the world building through the side quests at all, because I like it too, to an extent, but they just felt so poorly paced. There wasn't really a good distribution of battles in and in between them, and even the battles that there were, once again, I just didn't really get anything out of the battle system, outside of a very select few fights. When I was playing through this game, it very much got to a point where even the idea of getting on and playing for a bit just sounded so unappealing to me. A, I either had to spend 3 hours walking around and talking to NPCs in terribly paced side quests, or B, I had to play through a boring dungeon with boring combat. The big reason that this game was so disappointing to me is because I do like this series, and I know what it's capable of when it's at its best, but this was just not it. I can actually say that I do kind of like Unicorn Overlord. I think it's a pretty decent game, and I had a good bit of fun with it for the most part. The disappointment here comes from the fact that I feel like if there were just a few tweaks, if they did a few things differently, it very, very easily could have been one of my favorite games ever made. But instead, it was sort of just a kinda funnish experience that I don't ever really plan on replaying. For the first 5 to 10 hours or so, I was genuinely having such a blast. There just seemed like such a level of depth and complexity that I could only have ever dreamed of. An absurd amount of units with an absurd amount of options when it comes to team building and character development / customization. Tasks with creating different squads of up to 5 characters made it truly feel limitless as to what strategies you could employ, paired with an equally seemingly in-depth tactic systems that truly let you develop the perfect team and create for insanely unique and well thought out combat phases. The actual maps themselves were also incredibly cool, utilizing a real-time combat system paired with a deployment system, and it really just felt like you were controlling a genuine army. The battles were just so much fun, and the amount of customization and player agency that I felt like I had really made me feel like I found one of my new favorite games. But then after that first honeymoon period, the cracks really started to show, and I was never able to see past them or enjoy the game in the same way again. I talked a lot about how the game is super deep and complex, but the game didn't really seem to want or expect the player to actually spend a lot of time thinking about stuff. The enemies and stages really aren't prepared for anyone who spent a lot of time in the menus, with most of the times, levels are just filled with suboptimal enemy formations and equipment, and it's really pretty easy to just cheese everything. I wanted this game to be one where in between every map I had to spend time completely re-optimizing my setups and skills, using different units and formations depending on the different challenges at hand, but I kinda just felt like there ever wasn't really a reason to do any of that. I'm someone who can just sit in the game's menu for hours upon hours, just endlessly tinkering with different setups. But this system really seems like it was more so focused on wanting you to build just a couple of sort of all-purpose squads and using them to steamroll through pretty much everything. And then once I realized that the game wasn't really designed around you using the tactics menu or formation squadrons to their fullest potential, that's when I became pretty disappointed with the game. And it's not like the game wasn't capable of creating challenges that required more of a mastery of the systems, because the Colosseum was exactly what I was looking for, and then some, with each stage being a completely new and challenging matchup that I could perfectly curate a team to counter it. I just wish the actual game and the maps were even remotely like that. And I understand that the game needs to be balanced in a way that can let casual players be and have fun with it, but I just wish that the hardest difficulty was more catered towards hardcore fans of the genre, looking for an experience to really dig deep into optimization. You pair this with other problems with the game, such as the level scaling being pretty rough. Due to the amount of side content and just the open world nature of the game, it was so hard to not be completely over-leveled over the time. If you even thought about doing even 50% of the side quests, prepare to be so over-leveled and overpowered during the story missions, and that really didn't help with the feeling like the game was too easy. And the other huge, almost unacceptable problem with the game that I can't believe took me even this long to mention. You can just re-roll unfavorable combat outcomes over and over and over and over again by just changing minor things in the pre-skirmish menu, basically meaning that the enemies can be soft-locked at all times. Just a huge exploit that I cannot believe made it into the game, affecting every single battle. I definitely think that this game had tons of potential, so if there's ever a sequel, I will be there day one, because honestly, I think the formula is just so there, waiting and ready to be perfected, but for now, I'm left pretty disappointed in comparison. I don't know if it's completely obvious, but I am a huge Megami Tensei fan, so when a new Persona strategy RPG was announced, I was pretty excited. While I definitely wasn't expecting anything like or as fun as the Devil Survivor games, I still thought that seeing this twist on the formula could be really cool, and that there was a lot of potential with the idea. And it did end up being pretty fun, actually. A lot of fun at times. But the problem is that it's just the kind of fun in the same way that a 99-cent game on the App Store is fun. There's just really nothing there. I would be completely lying straight to your face if I said that traversing the neatly designed maps, using one more and executing giant all-out attacks in order to beat the different battles and puzzle levels wasn't a lot of fun. But out of every single Megami Tensei game I have ever played, it is by far the most shallow and almost pointless feeling experience in the entire franchise. If you have played a few levels, you have genuinely played them all, with the amount of new mechanics being so sparse that it's almost ridiculous. The fusion system is also, to date, the most shallow and least interesting iteration I have ever seen. Each character has their main persona, and an empty slot where you can equip a secondary, adding new moves to the character's arsenal. The problem is that each persona only has 2 skills, so it almost feels just genuinely pointless to fusing outside of stats because frankly, 2 skill slots is not even remotely worth mentioning, or trying to optimize. And you could argue that because there are more characters that could equip all of these personas outside of just the protagonists, it needs to be less in-depth. But I will argue right back that Persona Q2 has tons more party members, and each persona is just as in-depth as the main series, with different moves, stats, and affinities. The whole Persona mechanic in this Persona spin-off just felt so pointless. And I guess to an extent, that's just not how the game is designed, but like, why couldn't it have been? Once again, I'm not saying that it needs to be the Devil Survivor 3 that everyone is waiting for, but I just feel like there was so much more potential with the Persona strategy game than just a neat little time waster, and that's pretty much what the game just ended up being. It just feels so un-Persona in every sense of the word. The Persona mechanic is so shallow, fusing almost feels pointless, and there isn't enough complexity in the battles to battle themselves that really make you think any more than like Angry Birds makes you think. If it were just another game Atlas made without all the Persona imagery and branding, I probably wouldn't have really had anything negative to say, but because they hyped it up as a tactical Persona experience, I really just ended up feeling let down. The only connections it really seems to have to Persona or Megami Tensei as a whole is pretty much in story and characters only. The boss fights are also pretty bad. It is in my opinion that a JRPG boss battle should be an ultimate test of skill, or a roadblock that really forces the players to optimize and show mastery over the game's systems. But a lot of the bosses in this game just utilize their own mechanics that make it feel so separate, and most of them just end up feeling like a different variation of just following a telegraphed sequence of events until the boss is dead. But honestly, I feel like this just ends up being more of a Persona problem rather than something specific to this game, but I'm still mentioning it regardless. But like I did say, I still think this game is pretty fun for what it is, and I still see it as worth your time, but my disappointment just comes from what I think it could have been, because it could have been great. But I guess maybe I just am not the target audience, I guess. I don't know. I'll just have to keep waiting for another Devil Survivor. Any day now, I'm sure. Thank you so much for watching my video, and if you've made it all the way to the end, you're pretty cool. If you did enjoy the video, and were able to look past some of my spicy takes, maybe drop a like or a comment telling me your opinion on any of the games I talked about, or maybe some of your personal least favorite or most disappointing RPGs of the decade so far. And like always, if you really enjoyed the video and want to see more by me, feel free to subscribe because I have tons of more videos coming out. And you can also join the Discord or follow me on social media, all linked in the description. I've been experiencing a bit more growth than usual lately in regards to this channel, so I would like to say I really am thankful and appreciate anyone who watches my videos, leave comments, and subscribe, and basically, thank you. Have a great one.